Hello everybody, welcome back to American Textbook Reading. Now we've been talking a lot about animals, haven't we, in the last few lessons. In this lesson, lesson 6, we're going to talk about where animals live. Okay, so where do all of these animals that we've been talking about, where do they live? In this unit, you will discover different kinds of habitats. Now that's an interesting word there, habitats. Actually, let's get into that right away with the word habitat. So habitat is a place where animals live, where an animal lives. So a habitat is talking about, the environment, the surrounding. If an animal lives in a forest, that's a type of habitat. Or if an animal lives in a desert, that's a different type of habitat, right? We talk about us, do you like to live in the city? That's a type of habitat. Or in the country? That's another type of habitat. So there are many different kinds of habitats, and in this lesson we are going to talk about different habitats and different words to describe the habitats about where animals live. Okay, let's take a look at a video of a special kind of habitat. What can we say about this habitat? We can see this bird here. Where does this bird live? We can see water here. Looks like maybe a river or a lake. We have a lot of vegetation, plants growing in the background. So we can see that this bird here, this is mama bird, right? These are her babies. What is mama bird doing? She really seems to be caring more about her appearance than about her babies. She's really fixing her feathers, or maybe she has an insect in there and she's trying to get that insect. I don't know. But anyway, obviously these birds live here. This is their home. This is where the babies hatch. That's where they're growing up. This type of habitat with all the water around and the plants and the trees, we could call that a wetland. Okay, it's a wetland. There's another type of habitat we can talk about, and we can see, well, this is a very special looking type of forest here. A forest, of course, is an area where there are many trees. Okay, so in a forest you can't really see very far because there's so many trees. A forest is an area with many trees and plants, but really it's trees that make a forest. Now this is kind of a special forest. This is probably in Northern California where we have these huge redwoods. Okay, it could also be in Australia. They also have very tall trees in Australia. I'm not sure where this picture is from, but this is kind of a special forest, isn't it? We don't really have these kinds of big trees in most forests. Most forests have the smaller trees like this one over here. But a forest is just an area with a lot of trees. Different types of animals will live in different types of habitats. Forests, we'll talk about what kinds of animals live in these different areas later on. Okay, so we looked at forests, but there's another type of forest that's a little special, right? It's called a rainforest, right? A rainforest, of course, is different from a normal forest because of rain. It rains a lot, right? So a rainforest is a forest in an area where it rains a lot. So this type of forest, people can also say it's a jungle, right? Jungle. Especially if the jungle is in a hot, humid area. That's a jungle. We find jungles in South America and Africa. If it's further north, right, further north, but it still rains a lot, we can still call it a rainforest. Maybe not so much a jungle because a jungle is really hot, but it's a rainforest. And this is a special area where it gets a lot of rain. The plants are really, really thick, and there's a lot of different animals that live in rainforests. The amount of animals and types of animals that live in a rainforest is really great. A lot of different variation, a lot of different species live in a rainforest. Let's take a look at a video here. We can see a video here of a rainforest, and we can kind of see, this vapor. What is this stuff? This is vapor. It's like mist. It's so humid there that the water is in the air. We can see it moving around on top of the water here. We can see very, very green, very, very dense, very thick plant growth. And that's what a rainforest is like. So lots of water, lots of plant growth, and it's hot and it's very humid. There's a lot of moisture in a rainforest. Okay, we'll move on. This is a completely different type of habitat. On one side we have rainforest, lots of rain. On the other end, the opposite end, we can have a desert, no rain, or very, very, very little rain. And we call this, of course, a desert. We can see a picture of a desert here. Well, one of the more famous animals that live in a desert is a camel, right? Camels live in deserts because they can store their food and water in the hump on their back, so they can survive for a long time without water. And a desert is a place that gets little or no rain. So camels are adapted to live in the desert. They can live in the desert because they have adapted to the climate in the desert, the fact that there is little or no rain there. Okay, so that's a desert. Wow, this is very exciting. We have dolphins here, right? And the dolphins live in the ocean. Of course, you know what the ocean is. An ocean is a very large area of salt water. Salt water, very important, because if it's fresh water, it's not an ocean, okay? Fresh water, if you have a large body of fresh water, that is a lake, not an ocean, okay? A large body of fresh water is a lake. Like you have in America, you have the big lakes, the Great Lakes. They're fresh water, not salt water. If it's salt water, we call it an ocean. Now, these dolphins live in the ocean. Of course, they live in the water. They're just having fun. That looks like a lot of fun right there, doesn't it? They're just coming out of the water, but of course, they live most of their lives in the water. Okay, very exciting picture. That's an ocean. Okay, we also have a very special type of habitat, and that is called the Arctic. The Arctic. The Arctic is an icy and cold place near the North Pole. The Arctic is in the North Pole. Antarctic is the South Pole. But we are talking about the Arctic here. Polar bears live in the North Pole. Polar bears don't live near the South Pole. Similar conditions, North Pole and South Pole, right? But in the Arctic, it's special. There is no land under the ice. No land. It's just ice. That ice never melts. Oh, some of it does, sure, but most of it never melts right at the top of the North Pole. So this polar bear is walking on ice. Underneath the ice is water, no land. That's how cold it is, that the ice stays frozen all year round. Now, of course, it shrinks in the summertime and it grows in the winter time. It does go like this. So some ice does melt, but a lot of it never melts. Okay, so that's very interesting. If we take a look, it's very cold up there. Can you imagine what life is like for the polar bear there? Does he look cold? He doesn't look that cold. Actually, he's kind of big, right? Polar bears are big animals. But look at the fur on that polar bear. He has a really big coat, a really thick fur of hair. And that's what keeps him warm. Even though he lives up in the Arctic, you know, he stays warm because he's got such a good coat of hair on. And he stays warm there. He doesn't look cold. He's just kind of like shuffling along like ordinary bears do. You know, and they usually eat seals under the ice. That's what they hunt. Okay, it was too cold in the Arctic. Let's move on to a wetland. A wetland is a special type of habitat because it's a mixture of water and plants or a little bit of land. A wetland is an area covered with water and plants. So wetland, sure, there's water there, but the land is not too far underneath the water. The water is not very deep. The water is usually shallow in a wetland for most of the wetland. And you could probably walk out there. The water would come up to your legs or maybe your hip or your waist up here. But you could probably walk out there because the plants are growing in the ground just under the surface of the water. And this is a wetland. A wetland is very, very important for many birds. Birds who will fly by, they will come down here. And this is a very, very good habitat for many types of birds like ducks and geese and swans. Birds will come here and they'll be able to swim around, find food, and it's a very good habitat. Not just for birds, but for many other types of animals. And a lot of animals will live in this type of habitat. Okay. Another type of habitat is a grassland. Now, a grassland, of course, there's lots of grass, but there's no water right here, right? If there's water, it's under the ground, right? You will not get wet if you go walking along a grassland. But another point about a grassland, there are no trees. So it's not a forest, it's open grassland. You can see for very far. Grassland is a large, flat area with a lot of grass. So the characteristics about grassland, no trees, it's flat, so you don't have mountains or hills, and it's large, it's a large area, it's flat, and it has a lot of grass. What lives there? Well, in the American West, a long time ago, buffalo lived on the grassland. Antelope live in the grassland. Deer live in the grassland. Lots of different animals will come by and eat the grass, okay? And they can roam and run around free without any barriers like trees or mountains or hills, okay? So that's a grassland. Now, we also have a word here. This is not a habitat, but it's kind of, it's a verb, to cover. To cover something means to give it shelter and make it safe. So what kind of animal is this? Kind of a kyupji animal, right? Cute. It's a cute little crab here, and this is a special type of crab. It's called a hermit crab. A hermit crab. So this animal is a hermit because he lives alone. He's a hermit crab. And they're very cute. You probably have seen these before. Maybe you've had one as a pet before. I don't know. But the crab will go inside the shell. And when it gets too big, what does he do? He leaves that shell and he picks up another shell and goes into that, right? So hermit crabs are very interesting. They cover their bodies with a shell made by a different animal, right? You can't really call this a habitat, but it's just a shell that covers the animal. A habitat is the area where an animal lives. This is just a shell. It covers the hermit crab. So some animals will cover themselves with things in the environment, like a hermit crab. Very, very smart little crab, isn't he? Okay. Now let's take a little bit of a review here. We have different types of environment, different places for animals to live. Let's review here. We can see that this deer here, or this antelope is living in a forest. It's covered with trees and plants. Although this is a forest, we can say it's a forest because we probably have a small tree here, some plants here, but it looks like the area is kind of a mixture. There's forest here, there's also grassland in the background, okay? So this part over here would be forest, okay, where there are plants and trees. Okay, so we talked about a wetland here. Let's watch a video about a wetland. And this is a typical wetland. We can see the water here down on the bottom. We can see a lot of plants growing. Oh, there's a bunch of birds right there. That's a flock of birds coming up from the wetland and flying around. Something must have scared them, right? Or maybe they just decided, hey, let's move to another place. Okay, so this is a typical habitat for birds. It's a wetland. We can see the combination of water and land, okay, right underneath the surface of the water. Okay, let's move on. The next one is a desert. Desert, of course, is characteristic because it has very little rain, and camels are adapted. Camels can live in the desert because they carry their food and water around with them. They can survive a long time without water. Let's take a look at a video of a desert. And these are camels moving across the desert. Look at how dry it is. There's no water around here, right? There's lots of camels. They can get around. They can survive in the desert. But look at the ground. There's no plants, no water. Very, very dry. Look at that. It's just dusty. They're kicking up the sand. There's just dusty. There's just absolutely no water in that ground. Okay, there's a little bit of plants, but the plants are brown. They look like they're dead. They haven't had a drink for a long time. Whew, it's getting hot. Let's move on. Okay, the next place, ocean. Yeah, I like the ocean. I like the ocean more than the desert, really. The ocean, of course, is a large body of salt water. Let's take a look at a video of an ocean. Okay, if we take a look at that, look at that. I think this is my favorite place. This is my favorite habitat. You could lay on the beach, get some sun. You can go swimming in the water. You can catch a crab for your dinner. Okay, so an ocean is another type of habitat. A lot of different types of animals will live there. I don't know if these crabs would be good for dinner or not. They're a little small. But you could go fishing off in the ocean. A lot of fish and other animals will live out in the ocean. Okay? And it's a very beautiful habitat. Okay? Of course, I like to be on the coast. I wouldn't want to be out in the ocean. That would get a little too much, right? But I would rather be on the edge of the ocean, next to the ocean. Okay. Let's review with some exercises. We've talked a lot about different vocabulary. Let's put them into sentences. Our first sentence. An icy and cold place near the North Pole. Our choices: desert, ocean, habitat, forest, rainforest, or Arctic. Okay, so we've just talked about these. Which one of these habitats is an icy and cold place near the North Pole? If you chose the Arctic, that's correct. That's absolutely correct. So it's the Arctic. Icy and cold, right? So cold that ice never melts at the North Pole. Okay, so that would be the Arctic. Okay, number 2. A place where an animal lives. A place where an animal lives. So we're looking for a word that's not a habitat, but that describes all places where animals live. And I just gave you the answer, didn't I? It's not a habitat. It is not one of these specific habitats. It's the word habitat, which describes a type of area or a type of environment where an animal lives. That is a habitat, a place where an animal lives. So habitat is like the super word, and the smaller words, desert, ocean, rainforest, all of these others, they are under the word habitat. Habitat is the super word on top, and all the other places are below. Okay? Okay. So number 3. A place that gets little or no rain, right? Camels live there. That gives you a hint. Of course, if you chose desert, you would be correct, right? We saw the video of the desert, really hot, dry. Hardly any rain gets there at all. Okay, let's move on to the next 3. Number 4. A wood in an area where it rains a lot. So a wood is also synonymous. Synonymous means the same thing as forest. So wood and forest mean the same thing. You could substitute the word forest here. The reason they didn't put it there was because it's too easy if they put forest here, because of course you can just put these 2 words together, rain and forest, and you have your answer, rainforest. So a wood or a forest in an area where it rains a lot is a rainforest. Let's move on to number 5. An area with many trees and plants. Kind of talked about that already, didn't we? Of course, that is the forest. Forest is an area with a lot of trees, a lot of plants growing. Okay, you can't see very far, and there's a lot of vegetation, a lot of plants, a lot of trees. Okay, number 6, our final one. A very large area of salt water, not fresh water, salt water. We talked about that. That's the ocean. That's a very beautiful place, of course, to live. If you live on the beach or you live next to the ocean, it's a very beautiful place. But salt water, many animals live in the ocean. Lots of fish and some mammals too, as we saw in the previous lesson. Okay, well, let's take a look here at a chart. We have a chart showing animals in each different habitat. Okay, over here we have the habitat on the bottom. We can start with there. We have forest, we have wetland, we have ocean, we have desert. We have pictures of the different types of animals that live in each type of habitat. We also have some other names of animals that also live in that habitat. Let's go over the chart in turn. In the forest. So in the forest, a bear lives in the forest. Also, deer, owls, and squirrels live in the forest. Of course, you know what a squirrel is, right? It's a small little creature with a big bushy tail, big bushy furry tail. We saw one before when we were talking about fur. That's a squirrel, right? So bear, deer, owls, and squirrels live in the forest. If you go in the forest, those are the animals you will probably see. How about in a wetland? We have a picture here of a baby crocodile, right? He's kind of cute, but be careful. He can bite your finger, right? So it's an alligator, right? Oh, I have a baby alligator here, or you can also say crocodile, depending on freshwater or salt water. Snails or mosquito. Mosquito. Oh, I hate mosquitoes, don't you? Mogi shirayo, right? I really don't like mosquitoes. But unfortunately, if you go to the wetland, the mosquitoes will find you. Maybe you're not looking for the mosquitoes, you're not finding the mosquitoes will find you. They'll come to you, don't worry, if you want to see a mosquito. But usually people don't want to see mosquitoes. Those are things that live in the wetland. How about the ocean? Of course, we know that sharks live in the ocean, right? Sharks are very impressive and amazing creatures, right? So sharks live in the ocean. Dolphins, we saw the picture of the dolphins jumping over the oceans. Wow, great, right? So dolphins, whale, really big whales, and gull. What is a gull? A gull is a type of bird, a seagull. These types of birds live on the ocean or next to the ocean, and they usually, they go for fish and crabs, and they live on parts of the ocean. In fact, a long time ago, when sailors were sailing across the ocean, when they saw seagulls, they knew land is close by. So seagulls are very common at the ocean. In the desert, what kind of animals can we find in the desert? Well, here's a picture of a camel. We saw the video with many, many camels moving along. What other kind of animals can we find in the desert? Scorpion. Be careful of the scorpion, right? It's that creature with the tail that comes on up and sticks you. It's got poison in it. Scorpions are dangerous. Be careful of those. And of course, lizards live in the desert. These animals don't need a lot of water. They don't need a lot of rain. So these animals can live in the habitat of the desert. These are all different habitats. Okay. Let's take a look here. Now this is kind of like a quiz. We're going to give you a little bit of a quiz to take a look at these different things. We have pictures here of different habitats. Some of them have animals in it. I like this picture. This squirrel has a very interesting haircut, right? He looks pretty cool. Okay, maybe he's a rebel squirrel. Okay, so we have different pictures of different habitats, and we have the words here. What we need to do is match them. So let's work together. Okay, the first one here, let's go with the words first. Forest. Which picture shows us a forest? Here, that doesn't have a lot of trees or plants, does it? Not a lot of trees or plants here. Hey, wait a minute. This squirrel is sitting on a branch. That is a branch of a tree. And that's probably our forest right there. There's not a lot of trees here, so in a forest there are many trees. So we will match this up like that. Okay, so our forest is here with the squirrel with the really cool haircut. Okay? Okay, B, we have wetland. Remember we talked about wetland is a mixture of water and land. And that looks like this picture right here, right? We can see the water, and we can see that the plants are growing right on top of the water, not really on top of the water, their roots are going to the land. There's land right underneath the water, so the water is very shallow in the wetland. Good habitat for birds. Next, our next choice, C, is ocean. Of course, we can find that right away. These are our last two choices. Ocean, of course, there's a lot of water, right? It's salt water. We know that because whales live in salt water, and this is a picture of a whale. By the way, you might be wondering what this white thing here is. That's a section of ice. It looks like a glacier sticking out on the ocean. So this is up north. This is very cold ocean up here. This whale is swimming next to a big chunk of ice. Okay. So that leaves us with our last one. That, of course, is the desert. We can see a snake that lives in the desert. Snakes also live in the desert, along with scorpions and camels and other lizards. Or lizards. There's little or no rain, right? There's no water here. Nothing grows. But snakes can get along in the desert. Okay, so that matches it up. And that is our review for the habitats. Okay, finally we come to the true-false questions. If the sentence is true, we circle T. If the sentence is false, we circle F. Let's take a look. Number 1. A desert is a very dry place. True or false? That's pretty easy. Of course, it's true. A desert is a very dry place. Little or no rain. Hardly any water in the desert. We just saw a picture of the desert with the snake. Number 2. A wetland is a very large area of salt water. Is that true or not? That's not true, right? That's false. A wetland is not salt water. I didn't really talk about that before. I was talking about an ocean has salt water. But a wetland is usually fresh water, right? Wetland is usually fresh water. And a wetland is a mixture of water and plants. It's not a very large area of salt water. That would be the ocean. And plants don't live very well in salt water. Seaweed does, but that's an exception. Usually plants don't live well in salt water. So a wetland is a very large area of fresh water and plants, vegetation. So this is false. It's not salt water. 3. Habitat is an area where it rains a lot. Is that true or not? Remember, I made a special point about habitat. Habitat is a special word that describes different areas, right? So habitat is a super word. Forest, desert, rainforest, wetland. These are all types of habitats. So habitat is an area where it rains a lot. That's not true, right? That would be false. If we crossed out habitat and we put rainforest, then it would be true, but it's not like that, so it's a false statement as it is. If we want to make it true, we have to change it. Then it would be a true sentence. But habitat, that's false. That's not correct. Okay, well, we're going to take a short break here, and then we're going to get into the reading section next. So let's take a short break. See you soon. Okay, welcome back. It's time to go over the reading section for this lesson. Now, the reading section, again, we have a topic sentence here. A habitat is a place where animals live. Okay, this is a good topic sentence. Again, a good use of the word habitat. Remember, habitat is the super word, right? All the different types of habitats are linked to it. So we have rainforest, desert, wetlands, right? So of course we're going to talk about a habitat is a place where animals live, and there are many kinds of habitats, right? There are many different types of habitats. This passage will describe many different types of habitats. So let's see what kinds of habitats we have here. Of course, this is a certain type of habitat. Take a look at this. This is kind of interesting. What is going on here? There's a little gopher coming on out. Oh, what did he do? He got dirt all over his face. Crazy. Now he's all got a dirty face, so he shakes it off, right? What a silly gopher, right? Okay, he comes on out, and we can't really see much of the surrounding area, but we can see that his habitat is a hole in the ground. Okay, his habitat is a hole in the ground. So he probably lives in the prairie or grassland. Okay? Forests are a good habitat for animals to live. So one type of habitat is a forest, and we can see a picture of a forest here. In a forest, there are many trees, plants, and food. So this is our first habitat right here, forests. We hear kind of a general sentence about forests, then we hear more details. Many trees, many plants, and lots of food. Okay? Then we move on to our second type of habitat, and that is rainforest. In a rainforest, there are also many trees, and it rains a lot. But of course, the difference between rainforest and forest is that in a rainforest, it really rains a lot, probably almost every day. There's so much water in a rainforest. In a forest like this, it probably rains a bit, but it probably doesn't rain every day, and not a lot, right? They're still open, it's still a little bit dry on the ground, but rainforest is very, very wet area, very wet forest. Okay. Another habitat is the ocean. So the ocean is another habitat. Here we have another general sentence and more details about the ocean. What can we say about the ocean? It's a large area of salt water, not fresh water, salt water. Many animals that can swim, like these dolphins here, live in the ocean. Fish, whales, all sorts of different animals that can swim live in the ocean. Okay, what's another type of habitat? Actually, we have two habitats on this slide. The first one, of course, is a wetland. There is a lot of water and plants. Its water is salty or not salty. True, before I said wetlands are usually fresh water, but some wetlands next to the ocean, they can be salty, a little bit salty, right? Probably a mixture of fresh water and salt water. Okay, so a wetland is an area that's covered with water, but the water isn't very deep. That's a very important part of a wetland. So it's not very deep, so the plants can reach down and grow off the ground that's just under the surface of the water. And that, of course, is what we call a wetland. A grassland is flat. You can see for a very long ways. It, of course, has a lot of grass. If it didn't have grass, it wouldn't be called a grassland. So a grassland is flat. It has a lot of grass. Okay? Okay, the Arctic and the desert, two more habitats that we're going to talk about, are habitats that are not good for animals to live. Notice they're grouping these two, the Arctic and the desert. They're putting them in the same sentence because they are both are not good for animals to live. It's difficult for animals to live in the Arctic, and it's also difficult for animals to live in the desert. Even though they are very different types of habitat, they are similar in the fact that they are hard to live in. The Arctic is very cold. There's no plants that grow up in the Arctic, so it's very hard for animals to live up there. On the other hand, the desert is very hot. There's no rain. So again, plants don't grow in the desert. It's hard for animals to grow, to live in the desert. Because, of course, if you think about it, animals need plants to survive. In the forest, there's a lot of food because there's a lot of plants. So environments or habitats where there's not a lot of plants, it's a difficult environment for animals to survive in. The Arctic is very cold. A desert is very hot and dry. In the desert, it does not rain much, and we have different pictures. Okay? Even though they look like very different places, the thing they have in common is that it's very difficult to live in these places, in these two places. Okay, we finished the reading. Let's go on with how that reading was organized. Here we have the reading skill classify. Now this reading passage is a very good example of classification. We have the word habitat, right? We talked about the word habitat. There are different types or kinds of habitats. When you take a large group and you pick out parts of that group and you put them into smaller groups, that is called classify or classifying. Over here we have a chart that shows the name of the habitat over here, and then on the other side we have the details of that habitat, right? So let's take a look here. We can figure these out. Number A, or letter A, we need to fill in the blank. Here are words here: cold, dry, flat, ocean, rainforest. How do we fit these words into this chart? We don't know the name of the habitat, so we should look at the details. A lot of trees. It rains a lot. Okay, so there's a lot of trees there. It rains a lot. What can it be? Of course, if you picked rainforest, that is correct. It's rainforest. Okay, B is our next choice. We don't know the name of the habitat, but we do know the details. It's a large area of salt water. Salt water. So what is that? That, of course, is the ocean. We talked about that. Large area of salt water is the ocean. Moving on down to the next one, we know the name. We know the name of the habitat, but we need to figure out one of the details. It's very hot and beep, not much rain. So if there's not a lot of rain, what is it? Is it cold? Not necessarily. Dry. That's our answer. Very hot and dry. Dry means not much moisture. So it's very hot and dry because it doesn't rain a lot in the desert. The next one is grassland. Grassland, we don't know this detail, but we can see it has a lot of grass. If we look down here, what fits in there? Cold in the grassland? It can be in the wintertime, but not usually. Dry, we already used dry. Flat, flat. Grassland is flat. We talked about that. There's no hills or mountains to break it up. Very flat area, and it has a lot of grass on it. Okay, so that's called a grassland. Finally, our last habitat is Arctic. Arctic, up at the North Pole. Remember, the South Pole is Antarctic, right? But we're talking about the Arctic up at the North Pole. And the Arctic is very cold, isn't it? We saw that polar bear. The polar bear is not cold. He's got a nice, thick fur on, so he's not cold. But you saw where he was. All around him is ice and snow, and that ice never melts. It's really cold. There's no land up there. It's just ice that the animals walk around on, and it doesn't melt, so they can walk around on it. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. We're going to do some comprehension questions. Number 1, what is the name for a place where animals live? So remember, we're talking about not just this one of the smaller words like rainforest, desert, or ocean. We're looking for the super word that talks about all the types of places where an animal will live. And that, of course, is habitat, B, right? A habitat is the name for any place that an animal lives. It could be a desert, could be a forest, could be the ocean. Any place where an animal lives, we call it the habitat, okay? Or a habitat. Number 2, The ocean is a large area of what? What are we looking at? Our choices are ice and water, wetland, or salt water. Okay? The ocean is a large area of salt water is our best choice. Now, you could say ice and water if you're up at the Arctic, right? But the ocean also exists, of course, in warmer areas. So the best choice here is salt water, right? Because even though we can say that, yeah, well, sure, there's a lot of ice and water in the Arctic Ocean, but it's not just the Arctic Ocean. We're talking about oceans everywhere, right? So the ocean is always just salt water. Even in the Arctic, it's salt water. So this is our best answer, C. Wetland, no. Remember, wetland is very shallow. The land is right underneath the water. That's not an ocean, right? That's too shallow to be an ocean. That's a wetland. Okay, let's move on. Okay, continuing on with number 3 and number 4. 3, we see a desert does not get much rain, and we have to finish this sentence. But look at this. We have A, B, and C, and they all start with but. Okay? So a desert does not get much rain. That's true. Then we're looking for something opposite that is also true or that makes sense. We're going to get rid of the ones that don't make sense or are a little silly, right? So a desert does not get much rain, A, but it is a good habitat for animals to live in. Is that true? Is a desert a good place for animals to live in? If you remember, just a few minutes ago, I said a desert and the Arctic, what do they have in common? They are both difficult places for animals to live in. So this is not true, right? A desert is not a good habitat for animals to live in. A is not the answer. A desert does not get much rain, but it still has a lot of grass growing there. That doesn't make sense, right? If it doesn't get a lot of rain, there's not a lot of water there, there's not a lot of grass growing there. And remember, we saw the picture of the video of the desert. It's just sand. It's just dry dirt. There's not a lot of plants growing there. And the very few plants we saw were brown. And it's not a lot. This says a lot of grass. So this is not correct either. Okay? That leaves us with C. Let's see how it looks. A desert does not get much rain, but a rainforest does get a lot of rain. And that's true. That's why we call it a rainforest. It gets a lot of rain. So that is true. And that would be our correct answer, number C, or letter C. Let's move on to number 4. 4, a wetland has a lot of water and plants. True. And then we need to look at A, B, and C. Here we have and, but. Okay? So A and B is like we're saying something else that's true about the wetland, but B, we're probably going to say something that's negative about or opposite from the first part of the sentence. So let's go over them. A wetland has a lot of water and plants, A, and its water can be salty or not salty. We talked about that a little. Before I said the wetland is usually fresh water, but it can also be salty, especially if it's next to the ocean, right? And the land kind of breaks up and the ocean can come in and make it a little bit salty. So actually A is the correct answer. A wetland can be salty or not salty. B, let's just practice, continue. And animals like camels and scorpions live there, right? So you can see scorpions swimming along in the wetland. No, that's crazy, right? Scorpions don't live there. They can't live there. Camels would be very out of place in the wetland, of course, because, they'd be stepping in the water, right? So camels and scorpions do not live in wetlands. They live in deserts. So obviously B is wrong. How about C? A wetland has a lot of water and plants, but is very dry because it never rains in a wetland. It's very dry. That doesn't make sense. It is very dry, but it's a wetland. It has a lot of water. So that right there, that doesn't make sense, right? It has a lot of water, but it is very dry. That doesn't make sense right there. And of course, it's not true anyway, because it does rain in a wetland. Wetlands do get lots of rain. We didn't really talk about that, but it does rain in a wetland. But just the fact that it says it has a lot of water and it is very dry, that doesn't make sense. It makes no sense at all. So that obviously is not correct. And as we saw before, the correct answer is A. Let's review very quickly. We have a lot of different pictures here. These pictures are all places to live. What do we call places to live? Do you remember? We call it a habitat. A habitat. So places to live, habitat. we have different pictures of different habitats. Let's review. What are they? We've seen these pictures before. We've seen this antelope. It's living. We're not talking about this area over here. We're talking about this area where there's lots of trees and plants. Where there's an area with a lot of trees and plants, what kind of area do we call that? We call that a forest. Okay, so that would be a forest. Over here we have a picture of a bird. Looks like the bird is coming in for a landing, right? There's a lot of water here. We can imagine there's land just under the surface of this water because there are plants growing up out of the water. This is a mixture of water and land and plants. We of course call that a wetland. Very good environment for birds, like this one right here. Over here we see a camel, which kind of tells us right away what kind of habitat. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm skipping ahead. We're going to go over here. This area here, we see a lot of water here. We see a little crab here. And of course, this water is salty, right? So if this water is salty, that makes that an ocean, okay? And this is the beach right here. Of course, this could be a picture of a lake, but usually remember, lakes are freshwater, salt water. We're talking about the ocean. Okay, sorry, let's go back over here, and we have our animal here, the camel, and you can see the camel is on very dry land. Not a lot of water here. There's hardly any plants. Very difficult place to live. What lives here? Camels, scorpions, snakes. This place is called a desert. Okay, so this is a desert. So we have our review. And of course we have lots of other different habitats also, like for example the Arctic, the rainforest. These are all different types of habitats. So when we think about animals, we can think about, what kinds of animals there are, what kinds of parts of the animals there are, and we can also think about where do animals live. And this unit was all about where animals lived. Well, I hope you learned a lot. As always, we'll see you guys next time. Take care, everybody.